So this week we are finally opening the book of Exodus. We have said farewell to Genesis and are entering now into a different narrative. The book of Exodus opens with, "There arose a Pharaoh in Egypt who knew not Joseph." To bring you up to speed, if you haven't been following, there was great famine in the land of Canaan, where Jacob and his sons had been dwelling. And one of his sons was sold into slavery by the 11 others. That son, Joseph, ended up at Pharaoh's court, serving Pharaoh and rising to the rank of vice president at the time, literally running the country on behalf of Pharaoh. When famine struck the land of Canaan, Joseph had, through divining through his dreams what would happen in the future, had stored enough food in Egypt to support Egyptians and anyone who lived in the land for the 7 years of famine that were now upon them. And Joseph and his sons, make a long story short, are going to be welcomed in the land of Egypt, given the most gorgeous of all regions, the most fertile land of all of Egypt, the land of Goshen, and settled there. Time passes, those generations die, and the book of Exodus opens. There arose in Egypt a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. And there started the process of our enslavement. We were from the most wealthy in the land to the most abject servants and slaves in the land. Now, before I continue with exploring this Torah portion, I want to make a little, go on a tangent a little bit, to kind of also let you know the way that we here at Bet Aleph, it's good to be reminded from time to time if you've been coming, but if you're here for the first time, it's also good to know the way we approach Torah, the way we approach all of those stories. And the way really we approach all of those stories is that we don't believe in them at all. We don't believe in them in the literal sense. We don't take the Torah as a book of history. We take the Torah as a book of myths, of universal storytelling that has no base in reality, but that are there to instruct us into spiritual matters, that are there to transmit a tradition and a teaching that touches humanity on a universal level. And therefore, when we open the books of the Torah, we look into the stories and we declare and we assume that we, in fact, are all the characters, because all the characters of all of those stories represent aspects of ourself. And all the stories are there inviting us into exploring and engaging in a journey of awakening, a journey of liberation, a journey of healing. So as we open the book of Exodus, we are not actually looking at the bad guys, the Egyptians, and the good guys, the Hebrews. Especially nowadays that we might be confused with the Egyptians who actually in these days live in the land of Egypt and who are radically a different nation from the nation that existed under the pharaohs. But regardless of that, we are the Egyptians. We opened the book and I said to myself, I am Pharaoh. I am the enslaver. I am the Egyptians. And I am also the Hebrews and the enslaved. And I am also Moses. I am all the characters. This is a very selfish way to read Scripture. It's all about me. It's all about me, right? But again, it's a very different approach because because then you move immediately out of the literal level. So the story of the book of Exodus is the story of how do we get ourselves out of our own Egypt, which actually in Aramaic means a narrow place, a constricted place. So it's about a spiritual awakening. It's about breaking free from the narrow consciousness, from small-mindedness. That's what the story is about. Now that I have said that, there is this new character that arrives on the scene in the second chapter of the book of Exodus. This new character will eventually be named Moses. Now, the birth of Moses is barely a word or two in the whole story of the Exodus. In the whole Torah, there is barely a mention of his birth. Suddenly, there is one verse that says that his mother gave birth to the son, and we move on. And that is very hurtful, not to Moses, he didn't care, but to Rabbi Rashi. Rashi is the other French rabbi, besides me, who is probably the greatest rabbi who ever lived. 1,000 years ago, also in France, and who wrote not only an incredible commentary on the Torah, but on the entire Talmud. And just to do that in one lifetime is incredible. He also wrote commentaries on the book of Psalms. The man was a genius of his time, probably one of the greatest geniuses that walked the Jewish path. And Rashi is very upset. Rashi is very upset that nothing more is said about Moses' birth, that just he was born. I mean, it's pathetic. It's like an afterthought in the story of the Exodus, right? But Rashi notices that in the telling, just the mentioning that this boy is born. By the way, you know why the birth of Moses is just an afterthought in the Torah. Is the third born. I mean, if you have 3 children, you know that the third one, nobody cares. I mean, that's the one kid that has no pictures of him or her, right? Moses is the third born. All right, Aaron was there before, Miriam was there before. Moses. But Yocheved, his mother, who is not named yet, but Rashi always finds out what the names are. Yocheved, who is actually supposed to be 130 years old at the time, it's a very healthy woman, looks at her son as he's born and says, Ki tov, that he's good. And that's how Rashi hooks in. Because Rashi, very upset that, it's like all the other major actors in all the books so far, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and there was like birth announcements, angels appears, celestial dreaming of what's going to happen. I mean, it was like right, amazing. And Moses, nothing. So Rashi sees that Yocheved says that about her son, Ki tov, that he is good, and he says, this is connecting directly to God in the book of Genesis. When God manifests the universe, creates the universe, gives birth to the universe, and as light is created, God says at the end of the first day, after creating light, Ki tov, how good. And Rashi makes the immediate connection between Yocheved saying Ki tov and God saying Ki tov to the creation of light. And Rashi says that Yocheved saw the divine light beaming from the pores of her son, and the room where he was born was filled with light. Rashi transformed, by quoting a midrash actually, Rashi transformed the birth of Moses into a cosmic event. And then Moses is put into a basket because Pharaoh wanted to kill all the male newborns of Israel is saved by the daughter of Pharaoh. I'm really making the story really short. And he's raised as an Egyptian. He's raised in the court of Pharaoh as a prince in the court of Pharaoh. And that light that Yocheved saw in her son, that light that beamed through the room of his birth, is completely hidden from Moses. We see him as a teenager, and it seems to be a little more like Joseph than he would be of Abraham. I mean, he feels like he's very self-centered, he's very self-involved, he's not yet Moses. He hasn't let the Moses out. And that light seems to be very hidden. In fact, he's described as a very anxious teenager, as a very angry man. In fact, as he turns 20, he strikes and kills an Egyptian taskmaster who we saw beating up a Hebrew slave. And the fear arises in him. He's a very fearful young man. The fear rises in him, and he says, my goodness, Pharaoh is going to learn about this. I got to get out of here. And he packs up his little bag and finds himself in exile from Egypt. He's 20 years old, according to the Midrash. And between the year of 20, I'm still quoting from the Midrash, from the age of 20 to the age of 40, he becomes a general in one of the armies of an Ethiopian king. The Midrash explained that as he was raised in the court of Pharaoh, he was obviously raised in the arts of war. And so he was recruited by this general, as he probably traveled south, because Ethiopia is south of Egypt. And he probably traveled south and found himself a general in the army of this Ethiopian king who conquered parts of the land of Ethiopia. And the king's name was Kinkos. Kinkos. The great photocopier of Ethiopia. It's interesting. I mean, it's like, where do you get those names? Well, here you are, from the Jewish Midrash. After 20 years of fighting at the site of Kinkos, decides to go to FedEx. No, I'm just kidding. He decides to go to Canaan. He ends up actually in Midian, where he meets his teacher, the priest of Midian, Jethro, who becomes his guru, his master. He becomes actually also his father-in-law as he marries Jethro's daughter, and he's going to spend another 40 years in Midian, becoming a shepherd. He's exiled from Egypt for 60 years. For 60 years. And at the end of those 60 years, he finds himself walking the flock through, getting lost at the mountain of Horeb, H-O-R-E-B, Horeb in Hebrew. And that name is a very important name. It's a name that means desolate. It's a name that evokes the sense of wasteland. And it feels like Moses, after 60 years, has reached the dead end of his life, the dead end of his exile. He has reached the wasteland of his life. He has reached the deserted part of himself. There's nothing left of him. He is lost with as much as his flock in the middle of the wilderness. And then and there is the turning point in the life of Moses. And I mean that literally, because suddenly the Torah says that suddenly he turns aside, because in the corner of his eye he has kind of seen, without truly seeing it, something he had never seen before. And the Midrash is telling us that he had never seen it before because he wasn't ready to see it, because that which he's about to see was always there. Always there. But he was never available to actually witness what he now sees. And it takes for him to turn aside. It's like the Torah is telling us he had to move out of the dead-end path that he had been following for 60 years. And he turns aside and he sees, we know what he sees a bush. A bush that is aflame, a bush that is burning yet is not consumed. And that burning bush is not a burning bush. That burning bush is a mirror into which he sees himself. He is that burning bush. Because he has become this dried up, thorny, shriveled up person. He is the image of a bush in the desert, which is nothing is left of it. If you've been to the desert, you know there's no foliage. There's not a leaf on the bush in the middle of the desert. It's all dry wood, and that's Moses. That's what's left of him. A lowly nothingness, dried up, lost, burning, bush. But that bush is burning. What Moses sees in the moment of turning aside, when his life takes a complete new turn, is he comes face to face finally with the light that his mother saw in him the first day of his life. The light that he had buried all this time. And he sees the truth of his being shining right in front of him. He takes off his shoes as a sign of knowing the sacredness of the moment, knowing the sacredness of the experience he's faced with. And out of himself, out of the great fire burning from within him, the fire that he finally is available to see as he's never been able to until this moment, the still small voice of God, that is his voice, calls out to him and tells him, return home. Go back. Go back and free those parts of yourself that are still enslaved, that are still caught in the stories, that are still caught in the to-dos. Go back and free those parts of self that you have buried deep within. Those parts of self that are imprisoned. Go back and heal yourself. Go back and whole yourself. Deep dive within and bring the light of your being into the darkest corners of that self that is holding you back, that is, in fact, drying you up, that is killing you. That is the image of the burning bush. The burning bush that is inside each and every one of us. The burning bush that our mothers saw in us the first day of our birth. And that we might have spent 80 years of our lives burying it, hiding it, walling it off. And what is it that allows us to even do that? What is it that we are doing to ourselves? What is it that we are being pushed to that tells us we are not welcoming your light into this world? We are not welcoming your light into this life. We want you to behave a certain way. And we start to believe of the stories of our not enoughness. We start believing in the stories of our narrow construct and the box that we are told that we exist in. We start to believe that we can only do so much. We start to believe that we have to specialize in one thing to contribute to the society of our pharaohs. That we can only be happy here if we become the perfect slaves. What is it in us that sucks that in, that says, Amen, yeah, this is true, this is real. This is the way everybody's doing it, so let me do that as well. Let me hide that light. You know, some spiritual teachers tell us that the reason why we bury the light of our being is because we are so afraid of its power, of our own power. We are afraid that we are going to be too overpowering maybe to others. We are told to just take our seat and stay in our place and play our role. We are afraid of the power of our own light. The journey that Moses is invited into, as we are invited into, because we are Moses. Right? We are the voices, in fact, that enslave us, right? Or the echo of those voices. But we also have within us that Moses that is ongoingly, all the time, telling us there is more. There is more to you than just who you've become. You're not that shriveled, dried up, thorny, prickly little bush. You are a tree of life. And Moses is on the same journey we are on. In our tradition, in the Kabbalah, we say it's a journey from mochin de katnut to mochin de gadlut, from small-mindedness to big-mindedness, from narrow consciousness to expansive consciousness, a way to really shift our perspective, our vantage point on the world, on our life. From the narrow space of not enoughness to the big space of I am one with the universe. I'm the product. I'm the manifestation of the most holy. I am the light incarnate. Let me shine that light. Not because I'm looking for one-upmanship, but because the more I share of my light, the more light will grow in the world, because others will then be invited to break free from the darkness in which they have buried themselves. We do a disservice to ourselves, but we do also a disservice to others. We can only solve the problems that we are confronted with today from a higher plane of consciousness than the plane from which those problems have arisen. And if we are not doing this, we will not find the solutions. We need to shift from mochin de katnut, the narrow consciousness that has brought us here, to mochin de gadlut, in order to see more and find the answers we are seeking. We cannot find the answers here because we are stuck in the same loop, the same story that keeps us in Egypt. So what is it that is holding you back? What is it that has held you back until today? It doesn't matter. I don't care how old you are. Age has nothing to do with it. Today is the day that you have been called from your own burning bush, that it's time to heal and it's time to let go of all that keeps you stuck and to share with the world all that you were meant to share with the world. The whole of you. That is the story of the burning bush. That is why it is a critical story in the process of liberation. Because from that lowly bush, from that burning within ourselves, we hear what Moses has heard. We hear the call to move from mochin de katnut, the little self, to mochin de gadlut, knowing ourselves as the self with a capital S. From this little I am this enslaved, constricted I am, to the I am, all capitals, that I am. The I am that always I ams through us and as us moment to moment. And that is conveyed to Moses. Jal, it's time for you to get to the piano. In the sentence we all know, when that still small voice inside the burning bush tells Moses, wake up. Ehyeh asher ehyeh. Wake up to the I am, that 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 I am. The I am that I am's everywhere, everywhen, everywhere, and through everyone. I am that. I am. And any that you can point to is that I am. There is no thing else happening. So stop pretending you are not the I am that you are. Stop it. It helps and serves nobody. Let your light shine through, become the true light that you and I are meant to be. I'm not talking just to you, I'm talking to you as well. Because I'm not floating on or walking on water or anything like that. All of us are on this journey to discover and understand truly from our heart, from our soul, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. And that is obviously, because it couldn't be in any other place in our prayer book, on page 18.